classes. Next week, since it is Cesar Chavez Day, we're not going to have the large lecture. Yay. And then the following week, we're not going to have any large lecture either. But that week, you do have that Friday workshop that hopefully most of you guys know about or have talked about in your class. And we're going to be talking about it more in scheduling, which times you guys want to go to that stuff. So, yeah. Also, as we do have a speaker up here, if you can please keep your phones away, we'd all appreciate that. If you can keep rustling and movement to a minimum, and if you, for some reason, do have to leave, do it very quietly, and don't pack up until we're done. So thanks. Sorry, getting my back. So today our speaker is Elaine Leeder, who is the Dean Emerita of the School of Social Sciences. So that means she was the dean, but is recently retired. She actually still teaches sociology, but only in the fall. She's a professor of sociology. She's taught here at Sonoma State for many years. She actually received her PhD from Cornell University. She's written 5 books on sociology and social work and history and criminal justice, things like that. But she loves being here at SSU, loves interacting with students, and she came back because she only teaches in the fall. She came back here today to talk to y'all. So yeah, give it up for Elaine Leeder.
Okay. Have some of you taken my class? Would you put your hands up if you took my class? Oh, a good number of you. So you know that I'm not a high-tech teacher. You will see no PowerPoint. And I am not computer phobic, I can do it, but I really like real interaction. I went to college when teachers talked to you and had interaction, and that's how I teach. So this is going to be an audience participation show. I like to say I'm the Oprah Winfrey with academic rigor, which means that we're going to talk and we're going to try to engage with each other about the concept of leadership. And I did read the chapter that you were supposed to read for today about relational leadership models. So I'll refer back to it. But I'm a personal storyteller, and so I'm going to start with my story. And then what I will ask you as we start getting into some of the ideas and concepts from this lecture is to apply some of these ideas to yourself. And let's talk about those, okay? So when I was a kid, I went to work in the principal's office in elementary school, which I find quite ironic because then when I got to SSU, I became the principal. So it's kind of funny that in elementary school I was the clerk in the principal's office, and then I grew up to become the principal, if you will, the dean. And so very early on, people started to notice that I had leadership qualities. And I never quite figured out what it was about myself. I mean, it just kind of emerged. My mother gave me what was in those days called elocution lessons, which is how to speak, public communication, public speech. And so I learned early on how to project into an audience, how to make eye contact, how to engage people, and that sort of served me well as I moved along in my leadership abilities. When I got to high school, and then particularly in high school, I went into drama, and they picked plays for me because I could project the most, I think, in a space such as this. And so I became a leader doing theater, and that became fun because then I could take on other personas, because to be honest with you, I didn't have an identity. I didn't know who the hell I was. I mean, I was 15, 16 years old. Do you really know who you are at that age? I was a fat girl. I've always been large, so I always had a rotten self-image. And so theater provided me with an opportunity to take on new identities, to shine in public, but hidden behind a persona of the other character. So it worked for me. By the time I got to college, I really did not do theater very much, but I then went on through college and then got a master's degree in social work, where I could run groups for people and be a therapist. I got an MSW, and I became a therapist, and it was a great gig because I could listen to other people's problems, and I'll tell you the truth. I thought I had nothing to say, so I became a therapist. Because then you listen, you reflect back to people, and you don't have to say much. You know, they do all the work, and so I thought it was a good gig. Eventually, I realized I did have something to say as I grew into myself. But I got a tip early on about being a leader and And the tip was, and I'm giving you this one, and remember it for the rest of your life. Fake it till you make it. Because I didn't know what the hell I was doing. Right? I have faked every gig I've gotten into. But you learn it as you do it. Right? And so fake it till you make it. So I faked it as a therapist. I had no idea what I was supposed to do, say, act, be. They didn't teach me that in school. They just taught me how to develop good relationships with my clients. But I faked it, and I became a damn good therapist after. I feel sorry for my first clients because I didn't know what I was doing. But I was nice. So people thought I was good at what I was doing. So just keep faking. And I don't mean that glibly. I mean, it is funny. But a lot of us will say to ourselves, well, I can't do that. I'm not trained. Or I can't do that. I'm not ready for it. You are never ready for it. Never ready for it. We all have this sense, unless you're a narcissist, right? Who really believes, I'm hot shit, excuse my language. But most people have some self-doubt. And so just keep faking it until you make it. And so I kept getting leadership positions. And in fact, as a social worker, I was offered the supervisory position of other social workers in the clinic. And I thought to myself, oh my God, I can't supervise them. I actually turned it down because I would have had to have worked more, and I would have had to have really been a leader when I didn't feel ready for it. But eventually, I got a gig teaching in college because I had first an MSW, and then I got a master's in public health at Cal. And now that I had 2 master's degrees, they said, oh, now she can teach. I didn't know what I was going to teach. I just started to teach. And if you read enough, and you prep enough, and you fake it long enough, you become a teacher. I remember the first time I taught, people started to write down what I was saying, and I go, oh, don't write that down, I'm not sure. And now, if you're not taking notes, why aren't you taking a note, right? I got important things to say. So it's a matter of growing into your own shoes as a leader. And eventually you do. And so what happened was, I was a faculty member at Ithaca College in upstate New York for 27 years, a really long time. And I worked my way up. I started out part-time. Then I started out, they said, but if you want to be a full-time faculty member, then you got to go get a PhD. So Cornell was on the other hill in Ithaca, so I went to the other hill, and I got my PhD. And I was still teaching at Ithaca College, and then they said, okay, because you now have a PhD, you can be on tenure track, which means sort of work your way to the top. And so I worked my way to the top over 27 years, and eventually there was a new president who came in, and it was a woman. First time I had ever seen a woman, really big leader, like president of a university. And I thought, she's cool, I want to be like her. And so she became my role model and my friend. And I was elected as a trustee at Ithaca College. They had one faculty member who could be a trustee to represent faculty on the board of trustees. And so I got elected, and I started hanging out with this woman, Peggy, who was the president. And when my 3-year gig was up, she said, you can do more than being a faculty member, which is a great job, but I wanted a little more influence at the university level. So I applied to SSU, where I had wanted to be for 25 years, because I had gone to Cal and then went back to Ithaca. And for 25 years, I tried to get a gig back in the Bay Area. And eventually I got the job as dean here. And what I again felt when I got here, which was 2001, was, I don't know what the hell I'm doing. You know, I was a faculty member and I saw what a good leader looked like with Peggy. I saw what a bad leader looked like at various other institutions that I've worked in. I've worked in mental hospitals and prisons. And so I know what bad leadership looks like. And so I role modeled myself on the people who I really wanted to be like. And I chose a mentor. And if there's another piece of advice that I would love to give you as a leader, choose a good mentor. Find somebody who you want to be like. Choose them and ask them specifically to mentor you. And, you know, mentoring is not hard. You hang out with them, right? And you ask their advice. The other day I got a Facebook message from one of my students who graduated 5 years ago from here, and she said, I have to choose a field placement. Help me. So we talked for 5 minutes on the telephone, and I could help her pick a field placement. She was working on her MSW. And I'm still mentoring her, and I get emails and phone calls. I just saw someone who was in my first class in 1977. She's now almost as old as I am. And I just saw her, and she still considers me a mentor. And I still call Peggy for advice, my mentor, even though I've retired as dean. And so mentors really provide you with guidance. You know, it isn't like a parent, because your parent really has vested interest. A mentor knows you and gives you advice based on what they know about the field and about who you are in relationship to the field. I remember once I had a student who really wanted to go get his MSW, and I said, you know, Rob, you're just not the right material. He was not empathic. He was a tough guy. And he went and got it anyway. And then later he came back to me and he said, you know, I'm right. You were right, Elaine. And he became a researcher. He used his MSW and then got a PhD, but he became a researcher because I could tell, even though he wanted that, he was not the right kind of person for that kind of a career. So a mentor can really help you out. So as you age, of course, you're going to be given more and more responsibility. And as you show, and I understand here from Alvin, that all of you have leadership potential or are already in leadership positions, so obviously you've got what it takes. So now it's a matter of honing your skills, developing your skills, and some of the skills that, well, one of the things that I would like to say to you also, sort of as a bottom line, kind of 3 messages, but one of the important ones is one that was given to me when I got here, which is surround yourself with smart people and leave them alone. And I mean it. You hire or you work with the people who I was thinking about you. You know, when you were hired, they knew that you had the potential and they keep giving you the responsibility and you're learning it as you go. That's how you do it. I mean, there is training for leadership, but mostly it's on the job kind of training and learning. Once you have the abilities that you cultivate. So the best tip I'll ever give you is surround yourself with smart people and leave them alone. Watch them. Make sure that they're not screwing up, because they could, you know, kind of corral them a little bit, but leave them alone. Now, the other thing that I have learned about leadership, and I'm going to tell you some of my screw-ups too, because I have screwed up along the way. But the best thing about being, an important thing about being a leader is to know yourself. Know what you're best at and know what you're not good at. And find people to help you on what you're not good at and do what you're good at. So, for example, when I became dean, I didn't know the first thing about budgets. I was given a $5 million budget and told, manage it. I didn't know what the hell that meant, honestly. How do you manage a $5 million budget? Well, I found out what it meant was don't go in the red. Do anything you possibly can, but don't go broke. Don't lose money. So I was always kind of watching the budget, but I didn't have training in budgeting. I had a budget manager, and I would go into her maybe once every month, every 2 months, and say, I've just okayed this, or I've okayed that. And she would say to me, well, Elaine, we don't have the money for this, but we do have the money for that, because that fund line we have money in, but this fund line we don't. And I would call the people back and say, sorry, we don't have the money. One of the best things about being a dean during bad budgetary times is you can say no to everybody. And I did. In fact, it's harder when there's a lot of money around, because then everybody wants it. But if nobody's got money, then everybody is poor together. So I was dean during probably 14 of the worst years at SSU. 13 or 14 of the worst years. Things are, I hear, getting a little bit better. So know yourself and know what you're good at, and emphasize those. I'm good at listening. I'm good at talking to people and finding out what they want to do and trying to help them get there. And I also am good at facilitating groups. So one of the things that I was able to do during bad budgetary times, as a dean, I had 14 departments: sociology, criminology, anthropology, psychology, criminal justice, political science, history, environmental studies, 14 of them. And we would all sit around the table, the chairs, and you all know who the chairs are of your departments, and we would sit around the table looking at the budget. And our job during most of those years was to cut the budget. And so we would sit around the table and we would brainstorm, how do you cut the budget? Let's look at this line. Can we cut down on Xeroxing? Can we cut down on travel? Can we cut down on long-distance telephone calls? And we would brainstorm together the places to cut the budget. So I facilitated a discussion that we then could decide together. But of course, finally I would say, okay, which things should we cut? And they would go, you make the decision. But at least they had given me the input about where things could be cut, and then I just triaged it. I determined which places we had to take the money from. That seemed to me the least painful. So that we ended up down to, I think we no longer were into the bones, we were into the soul of the School of Social Sciences. But we were able to balance the budget, and we were still able, for a while, to graduate students. It took a little bit longer than we had hoped. So learn from what your strengths are, in my case, facilitating groups, and turn to other people who can help you in the things that you don't know how to do. And you are not, as a leader, expected to know how to do everything. In fact, any leader who thinks that they can do everything is wrong, and you don't want to work for that person, because they're usually autocratic. They're usually difficult to work for if they're the ones telling you got it. Now, sure, there needs to be some dialogue, and I might have said to the chair of the psych department at a certain point, I'm sorry, you can't have that many adjuncts anymore. You're way over the limit. And they would have to go back and implement that. But that was based on a discussion. So the other thing, and by the way, I would love for you to ask me questions as I'm going along. Put your hands up if anything resonates or makes you think that you want to ask a question now. We'll have questions at the end, but also now. I'm from New York and I talk very fast. And so please slow me down and ask me something. Anything? Yeah? All right, I'll just go on. But at the end, I'm not letting you out of here until 10 minutes of 1. So you better start thinking of your questions now, okay? The other things that I've learned as a leader is to be open to different ideas. Now, part of that is difficult sometimes because, as you grow older, you begin to think you know it all. I mean, oh, I've heard that before, or yeah, sure, we tried that, it didn't work, and, You know, everybody says that, but nah. And I've learned along the way to listen and be open to those ideas. Because even if you have an idea, somebody might have a tweak on that, or a better idea that might actually move you along in your goals a little more clearly. Now, along the way, what I learned also is the role of being ethical. And in this day and age, it really worries me because I think we have a lack of ethics in our society. People will steal and rob and cheat and lie for the hell of it, just because it's easy. And part of the importance of a leader is to not do that sort of thing, to not cut corners and to not tweak things and lie at things and act as if it doesn't matter, because a leader is a role model. My name, by the way, was never before Leeder, L-E-E-D-E-R. Before I was married, I was Schneerson, which was a completely different name. And I got the name Leeder in 1971 when I got married. And not long ago, I got a divorce, and my husband said, I want that name back. And I said, no way, because I am a leader now. I have grown into my name. And I find it amusing that that's the name that I ended up with, but it's appropriate. But in the process, I have had to develop a sense of real ethical behavior. And by ethical behavior, I mean such things as listening to your own inner barometer. And if you know something is wrong, don't do it. Don't do it. And in our day and age, that's a tough one because people cut corners and cheat and lie and steal. And I would love to, if there's anything I can teach you here, is to be an ethical human being, right? If you have a set of values, stick to those values. And don't necessarily compromise them, or if you have to compromise them, be very clear that you're compromising here, but that you don't like it. And come back to your values whenever you possibly can. And there have been moments when I have had to compromise my values. And it was very, very disturbing, but I made it a point to go on record as saying, I object to this. I used to always be the dean at the Dean's Council meeting and saying, I know you're going to do this, but it's wrong. Don't do it, and I am on record. And then, of course, the boss would say, well, Elaine, we know you don't like this, but we're going to do it anyway. And I would go, well, at least you got me on record about this. So be an ethical human being. Be open to differences and other perspectives. And practice your listening skills. Right? Listen to people. Don't do all, here I am doing all the talking today. Listen to people. Learn how to shut up. That's tough, especially in silence as a teacher. I used to always fill the silence. Couldn't stand it. Just shut up and listen. Something will emerge from the silence. In the space, something emerges, so let people talk. And in fact, let me do that right now. How about any ideas or questions or issues around anything I've said, like the ethics? Do you have a question about the ethics or anything related to anything I've said? And I'm going to take silence until we hear from someone. Thank you.
What's an example of your ethics were
Compromised? An example of my ethics being compromised. I have a tough one that happened right when I got here. There was a part-time faculty member who, a long time ago, none of you would never, ever know this person. It was like the first semester I got here. And the chair of the department came to me and said, this man has been fabricating his evaluations since 19 da-da-da-da-da-da. You know how you all do the online evaluations? We used to have them on paper. So he would go through, find empty copies and fill them in so that his evaluations looked good. And it went on for years. Well, that's pretty unethical, right? But the man was 82 years old. needed the job. My ethics were challenged in that situation. He had lied, but he was poor and old. What was I to do, right? What was I to do? Well, I knew that I had the greater good to consider, the students. My job as dean was to watch out for students on all kinds of levels, a number of classes, fabricated evaluations, mean teachers, faculty not showing up for office hours, all that stuff was my job to watch over. So I had to let him go. That was an ethical quandary for me, and I had to figure out which was higher for me. The ethical principle of taking care, through my job, of taking care of my students' responsibility, or my students, or taking care of this guy, and the greater good was the students. That was one of my hardest decisions. It was really tough. Thank you for asking. How about others? Not a one?
I have a question, Elaine.
Thank you, Bruce.
This is Steve. One of the things I struggled with my whole career here was trying to decide between what was best for me, what was best for my students, and what was best for the university.
Ooh,
Did you get put in those spots? And so,
every day.
what did you pick?
Every day. I could not do what was best for me in my job because I was the dean. I wasn't Elaine. So then it became a decision with what's best for my students versus what's best for the university. To be honest with you, as dean, I was supposed to watch out for my school, so I chose my school and the students in hopes that I could explain it to the university. And I was lucky enough that I had good administrators working above me who could understand what I was doing. So I could not choose what was best for me. And I remember times when I was sick and there was a budget discussion that was going to happen at the Dean's Council, and I showed up because I knew if I wasn't at the table, my school would lose. So I went. Those kinds of. That's a really good question, Bruce. What do you do?
I usually fall down to the best students.
Also. Yeah. Yeah, that's really what we were hired for. Unless, of course, it's a legal battle. And I was caught in many legal battles, had to go to court a number of times. And if it's a legal battle, then you have to go with the university because they're defending you on whatever issue emerges. So at that point, you go, but you have to justify it based on your behavior, watching out for students and faculty. Thank you. Pardon me? Right, it does happen all the time, and in fact, that's why I love being retired. I can say what's good for me now, without having to worry about the budget and the faculty and all of you until I go into the classroom. Then I worry about you. Okay, so let me go on. There will be moments again. You're leaders. I expect you to participate. You're not the vast beginners on campus, you are the stars on campus, so act star-like. Okay, where are we? So one of the things that the chapter talks about is mixing your head, your heart, and your practice. And one of my flaws was I didn't always use my heart. I used my head. I tend to be empathic, but in the role of dean. In fact, somebody recently said to me, "My God, you're so much nicer now." And I am. Because as dean, I had to be a hard ass. Right? I had to make decisions. I had to be, a faculty member didn't show up to their office hours. I had to go down the hall and say, "Where the hell were you? And I'm going to have to put a letter in your file, and you better show up the next time." That's being a hard ass. And so, nowadays, I don't have to do that kind of thing, but when I was in the job, I realized that I was using my head rather than my heart. And I think that there needs to be a balance between head and heart, and the practicing of the balance of all of that. And so often my struggle is to use your head or your heart? And I'd love to ask you, which do you do when you're making decisions as a leader? Which comes first in your thinking? Is it your head? Is it your heart? Is it your experience that you rely on? What are some of your experiences? And if you don't talk, I'm going to call on somebody. Remember from my intro to social class, I won't walk around, but I will point to somebody. Because you've got to show your leadership qualities. Yes, thank you.
For me, it's almost always been my head, because in all the situations that I've been in, if I use my heart, it wouldn't have helped other people in the situation.
What about the last part? I missed the last part.
It wouldn't have helped other people in the situation or myself if I didn't use my heart over my head.
Okay, so you use your head because you realize that if you use your heart, something goes wrong. Yeah, because I often say, I can't bleed here, right? It's a bleeding situation with your heart. And so there has to be a balance of, like that situation you asked me about, that was a balance of head and heart as well, because my heart said, leave the guy alone. My head said, nah, I can't. And I had to go with what was ethical and what was the right thing to do in my head. So, and sometimes we don't even realize it. Sometimes we just shoot from the hip. We just do. That was one of my problems. I would just act without thinking. And it's really taken me a long time, probably about 13 or 14 years I was dean, to learn not to say yes every time, because I'm a people pleaser. I want people to be happy. Sure, I'll give you a trip to Las Vegas for a conference where you'll probably play the slot machines all day. But I realized I couldn't, because my head could not allow those kinds of things. I could not always say yes because it was impractical, even though I very much wanted to. What about the rest of you? Let's hear from others about head or heart or earlier practice. What do you work with?
I usually work with my heart. I have a lot of feelings, but as far as I know it's not the best decisions all the time to follow my heart, so usually if it involves other people, I try to just focus on using my head even though my heart feels a different way about it.
Excellent. So you've learned that your heart rules, but you're trying to balance it. That's the sign of maturity. It really is, because as a younger person, we just kind of go with blah, whatever, right? Whatever. It'll all be fine. Maybe not. Had I kept that guy around, he would have been cheating forever. Probably died in the classroom. Not a good thing. So I did the right thing. Would not have been good to carry a body out of the class. Okay. How about others? Head, heart, or your old practice?
Well, I tend to be like a head person. Sometimes I have to accept that sometimes you do need to go with what your heart is saying. Sometimes just because you have all the information doesn't mean you're going to make the right decision.
Right.
So accepting defeat where you need to, and at the same time making some progress.
Right. I think that's brilliant. Accepting defeat so that you can make some progress. This is not, what is it? You can't always win the battle, but you're trying to win the war. And so you can lose that battle. I mean, I felt that way often, and I think you described it very, very well. Accept defeat and then work around and come to it in another way. Excellent. How about others? Yes.
I usually use my heart because everyone involved, they all want, when it comes down to it, they all want what's best for everyone else. So I usually try to figure out a way to make everybody get at least some of what they want so that it's a greater good impact that, it's not always going to work.
But it's not what?
It's not always going to work like that.
Right. So you're trying to find ways to compromise solutions. And it doesn't work out always?
No.
Then people resent it
Yeah.
because nobody got any of what they wanted. Actually, what I discovered sometimes with those situations, everybody wants something, so I do something completely different. And then it was like, well, she was the leader, she can do it, and that nobody's happy, but everybody's unhappy. But everybody's happy because nobody got anything. It's a strange dance. It's a strange dance being a leader. The other thing that I wanted to say is be purposeful. Don't just commit random acts. Lots of people will come to you as a leader, hear them out, and then weigh it all. Don't say yes to anything at first. Give it all thought. Because I remember when people would come in, oh, it's so funny to be sitting in a leadership position because people come to you and one person will tell you one thing, another person will tell you another thing. Have you ever heard about the metaphor of the blind man and the elephant? No? Well, it's a great metaphor because this is in fact what happens when you're in a leadership position. The story goes that 3 blind men or women are asked to describe an elephant. And one of them goes up to the hoof and feels around and feels it all and says, well, it's very wide and very hard, and it has hard nails at the end, and it's tall, and that's what an elephant is, like a tree trunk. Somebody else describes an elephant and gets the trunk and says, well, it's curved. An elephant is curved and it's small at the end, and then it gets larger. It has 2 nostrils, and it was male, and it has tusks. That's what an elephant is. Somebody else gets the ears and says, the ears, they're floppy, and they're not very thick, and they just flop around, and they have holes that go down into the head. Not one of them is exactly describing an elephant. That's what it's like when you're a leader, because you're hearing from this person and this person and this person about a situation, right? And none of it is completely accurate. So I would have people come from a department and tell me, you gotta get rid of this person, she's trouble. Then this person would come to me and say, you gotta get rid of those 2 people, they're trouble. Then someone else would come to me and say, they're all crazy. And I would agree with that person. And so the metaphor of the blind man and the elephant is you've got to look at the whole situation. Not just the trunk or the hoof or the ears. You've got to get all kinds of input. See, I remember at one point when there was trouble with the department, I had everybody in, and then I would go to the department meetings, and then I would have other people in to talk to the department, and because I was trying to get a fix on what the real problem was, because everybody else said somebody else is the problem. And I think ultimately we were able to solve the problem. So my advice to you is don't always accept what people are telling you. Hear it, get a big picture, not just a little picture, because there's more to the picture than meets the eye. I have to tell you, I have definitely had some real failures as a leader, and I know that often people like to talk about their successes, and I'll end with my successes, but my failures were great. I made some rotten hiring decisions. You know, the dean is the person who the department interviews folks, and then they give a recommendation to the dean. And so sometimes I took their recommendation, and that was wrong. I knew somebody else would have been better, but I went with the department's decision because I was trying to be a good guy, and I had not yet really found my voice. And particularly at the beginning of my tenure as dean, I hired people who lasted a year, might have lasted 2, and then they left, and then we had to do the whole thing over again. And I knew it. I knew it in the interview, but I didn't voice it, or I did voice it, but I was not strong enough. So I made some poor decisions and acted on them and regretted them later. I acted hastily and made some decisions that I probably should not have. Is a mistake. There was one time when I let a faculty member go when I probably should have gone through all kinds of rigmarole to get to that place. Ultimately, the decision would have been the same, but I should have gone through a process. So I acted hastily, and that was a mistake. And I acted in a mistake in not always listening to other people, and then getting in hot water. So I think when one is a leader, one has to own up to the fact that you're not invincible, and that you are a human being who can make mistakes. Now, I've had some great successes as well. One of them is that I've really built a good team that was able to work together, and people, even though we were cutting the budget, and everybody was miserable about the budget cuts, we still had a team. We still had a strong sense of community, and we felt like we were all in it together. Nobody was being singled out. We were all struggling. I was able to collaborate on projects. Have any of you seen the Holocaust and Genocide Memorial Grove on campus? Put your hands up if you have. Oh, good. That's my baby. I conceived of it and found the sculptor, raised the money, made the whole thing happen, got the Anne Frank tree to campus. If you have not seen it, it's on the way from here back to campus as you go through the parking lots and then over the bridge. And I urge you to take a look at it. It's really very beautiful and very touching. And the reason that I built it was I wanted a lasting memorial for genocides in general, and also because my family was killed in the Holocaust. And so I felt like this could be my campus to leave a memorial, particularly because there's a Holocaust and Genocide lecture series here on campus. And the other thing that I was able to do as a leader was to mentor others into leadership positions. And so some of the deans who are now in positions since I left, I was the mentor for. I have sent women off to leadership conferences, and they've gone on to get other leadership positions, so I feel really good about those successes. And I have to say, there is great joy in leadership, great joy in leadership. I could never go back to not being a leader, particularly because my name is still Leader, but also because I love it. And what are the joys? One, watching things come to fruition and seeing projects or things that you took, even if your name isn't associated with them, and there are lots of things on this campus that my name is not on, but I feel I can walk out and say, I did that. I feel good about that. And the other thing that I love about being a leader is that I'm a role model, and that people come to me and ask me for help, and in the process, I maintain my strong ethical behavior. And I think that is key to being a role model and a good leader. So I want you to ask me some questions. We have about 2 minutes, and I'd love a few questions about leadership. I'm not letting you out.
What is your advice about regretting a decision?
Regret. Good. Let it go. You can't fix it. You're fucked up. I'm sorry. I tried. My mother washed my mouth out with soap and it didn't work. Let it go. You know, I have made enough mistakes to know you can't lose sleep over it. This isn't meditation. It really is. My mantra is let it go. A whole bunch of things. Let it go. Let it go. Great question. How about others? Please. A little louder.
What were some of your biggest challenges as a leader?
My biggest challenge as?
As a leader.
Oh, I think I told you some of them. Firing people, cutting budgets, having to work with people that I didn't like or respect. Those were some of the biggest ones. Being broke all the time, having no money to do anything. That's when I became a fundraiser. I really got good at raising money because I saw nobody was going to give me anything, so I went out and I raised $1 million in my years, which is not a lot of money, but it helped me do the things I wanted to do. So I loved that. I love raising money. It's fun. It's called friend raising, not fundraising. You make friends with people and then you ask them to help you on projects you really like and enjoy. One more question. Yes?
Do you ever find that your passion and drive for
passion and drive ever stopped me from getting there. Some people call me a bulldozer, and I think I turned people off. I think ultimately I learned to quiet down and get there, but I think I'm not used to incrementalism. I don't like incrementalism. I just want to get there. And so I've had to learn to be less bulldozerish. So, well, thank you all. I'm teaching Intro to Soc in the fall, and I'd love to have you in my class, Soc 201. Thank you.